Hey you geeks! While preparing for my theory ranking video, I came across my old video called Love Beyond the Cosmere, where I discussed the latent themes of philosophic love in Sanderson's Stormlight archive and how they were totally supporting Renarin and Relane's queer relationship. I decided that video wasn't a theory so much as an observation, and it totally needed a revisit after Wind and Truth because now those latent vibes are quite obvious and people have opinions. People are calling it woke. Now, in the original video, I was already trying to distance Renarin and Relane from that woke title and coined them as OG Platonic. But I was also scared to use the words woke, queer, and gay in that video, so it comes across as basically incomprehensible.
What are you talking about?
I don't know.
In that video, I also opined that because Sanderson was going to great lengths to include platonic concepts of love, Silladin in the modern shipping context was not going to happen. So now seems like an excellent time to revisit and revise my earlier opinions. In this video, I will explore at how Sanderson is still trying to use Plato's two highest concepts of love and how they clash with the realistic cynicism of love that we are more used to seeing in contemporary literature, and how Sanderson combating this is creating new healthy relationships. Whether or not these relationships in the end count as woke, I'm not qualified to say, but I'm sure you'll let me know down in the comments. Full spoilers for Wind and Truth, of course. The truest love. For context, Plato gives his definitions of love in the Socratic dialogue, the Phaedrus. This philosophic discourse covers the entire order of the cosmos, according to Plato/Socrates, and it begins, of course, with young Phaedrus asking Socrates for relationship advice. For Phaedrus has received advances, a written speech from Lysaeus, who wants to be his lover on the grounds that Lysaeus does not actually love Phaedrus. Now, there is some historical subtext here that hasn't aged well, but let's ignore that and accept the premises, as Socrates does, that this is a relationship between two consenting adults above the age of consent. So, Socrates' chief complaint against this relationship isn't that it's queer, is that Lysaeus professes not to love Phaedrus, and that Lysaeus calls love an evil thing. That Socrates refutes, saying, but if love is, as indeed it is, a god or something divine, it could not be anything bad. Yet both these speeches about love have stated that it is bad. So in this regard, they have committed a transgression concerning love. Then Socrates wants to go on his way, but his daemon, or in the Cosmere we'd say spren, tells him he should stop and set young Phaedrus straight as to the age-old question itself.
What is love? Baby, don't hurt me.
And Socrates, of course, has an answer, a very long answer. And here we get that classical allegory of the chariot for the human soul. For the human soul is made up, according to Socrates, of three parts: a charioteer, the reason, and the passions, or the horses. Now, humans have one white, pure horse that desires higher things, and one black, lower horse that desires less noble things. Things that are unsuitable for YouTube monetization. Now, on a very meta level, this is why I love that Adolin and Dalinar begin with Adolin having a white horse and Dalinar having a black horse, and when Adolin's white horse dies is when he falls off the Prince Charming regime and does some stabby things that are unsuitable for YouTube monetization. Socrates uses the image of the chariot to give advice to young lovers, advising them to seek the highest form of love and follow that white horse to live their life here in blessedness and concord, masters of themselves and orderly, enslaving whatever produces degeneracy in the soul, and granting freedom to whatever renders it excellent. When they die, they are winged and light. Neither human sound-mindedness nor divine madness can confer a greater good upon man than this. This highfalutin, platonic ideal of love remained the highest in Western philosophical thought through the Christianization of the Roman Empire and carried on to thinkers like Boethius and then Dante. However, when the poet applies this theory to real life, something weird happens, for he assigns his purely philosophical love to Beatrice, the woman who he claims showed him the vision of the divine and the beyond during the Divine Comedy. However, in his work The Vita Nuova, Dante explains that he never actually spoke to the woman. Thus, the first narrative interpretation of Plato's ideal non-physical love is to love the other from a distance and never actually interact in this life.
To love pure and chaste from afar.
And Sanderson does indulge in that trope a little bit during the Stormlight archive, for we know Dalinar to be an honorable man when he keeps his distance from Navani, and Sanderson does include some of that distance makes the heart grow fonder element in Renarin and Relane's relationship, giving them only one scene together either before their relationship kicks off in Wind and Truth. Back in Oathbringer, from Rock's perception, we see Renarin stood up and dusted off his uniform, walked across the stone plateau, and settled down beside Relane. Renarin fidgeted and didn't say anything, but Relane seemed to appreciate the company anyway. Thus, Renarin and Relane's relationship doesn't begin with grand gestures of romance. Rather, during their separation during the second half of Oathbringer and Rhythm of War, we just get ongoing longing between the two and wishing the other were there. Now, when we come to a Sillidan trope, Sanderson seems to be taking pieces of that original highest love of Plato, but incorporating it differently. For Syl and Kaladin have a great close relationship, but they don't seem romantically interested in each other at all. And there's that whole ongoing issue that Syl is slowly revealing herself to be more and more of a goddess herself. Kaladin turned his head, looking at her flatly as she sat on his shoulder. Syl, what? I am a god. She grinned and held up her fingers, as if pinching something very small. A little piece of one. Very, very little. You have permission to bow to me now. Kinda hard to do when you're sitting on my shoulder. Thus, while Dalinar and Navani or Renarin and Relane were starting with the vibes from this higher level love, they seem destined to sink to the second level, which we will discuss next. While Kaladin and Syl were not intimate on account of their existing friendship. And to double down, she was already sort of a goddess, which the second type of love and its narrative implementations have very specific rules about those. The second, truest love. Now, the Canterbury Tales were written only 60 years after the Divine Comedy and are playing a lot with the same tropes. Specifically, they are both a tale of pilgrimage, though the Canterbury Tales are more about the friends and the stories we make along the way. The stories that are told in the tales are, beginning at least, about chivalric love, with the highest and truest form coming from the Knight's Tale.
You don't even know her name.
A name? Her name is Aphrodite.
Now, the actual Knight's Tale has a distinct and tragic lack of Heath Ledger and Queen, but it does have an instance of love at first sight, followed eventually by a joust. The love at first sight occurs twice in the case of two knights captured in a tower where they see a lovely lady walk in her garden below. The first knight to see her is struck with noble, platonic, highfalutin intentions. He is a true paladin named, of all things, Palamon. The second knight has distinctly, and as he says, lower ambitions for the lady. As he tells his cousin, "What wilt thou say? Thou knowest not yet now whether she is a woman or a goddess. Thine is a feeling of holiness, and mine is love as to a creature." Shenanigans ensue, and we eventually get to the joust for the hand of the fair lady, Amelie. Now, Orestes, the lower ambitious one, wins the fight, but the gods intervene and Emily is able to marry Palamon, who the knight teller of this tale informs us truly loved her after all, despite having never actually spoken to her.
The bad guy doesn't get the girl.
Now, Chaucer, it seems, wants to paint this as that idyllic philosophical love that Plato was talking about. Although Chaucer couldn't get Plato directly and had to go via Boethius, we can pull straight from the source, which says, "If the lovers resort to a coarser life, loving honor and not wisdom, then perhaps when drunk or in some careless moment, the uncontrolled horses in them both, catching the souls off their guard, draw them together, make that choice which most people call blessed, and obtain what they desire. When their lives end, they are unwinged, but they depart from the body eager to grow wings, so they derive no small recompense from their madness born of love." Now, this type of romance we still see arise in the occasional story even up to the modern day, the most egregious of which being the OG Disney princesses.
So this is love.
And in fantasy, we have the likes of Aragorn and Arwen, who never even talk to each other really on page, nor show signs of friendship. However, they do imply that they had a relationship before the story started, and at the very end of the story do in fact have a discussion, even if we aren't a party to it. Now, it would be too simple to say that this trope precisely is what Sanderson wholesale incorporates into his wholesome relationships in the Stormlight archive. For while they are wholesome, they are not simple and pure per se, even with physical attachment, because Sanderson wants his characters to be realistic, and even Chaucer writing The Knight's Tale did not find it realistic. Rather, he invented the next great trope in fiction and into fantasy of the cynical love. Technically, Plato deals with this kind of love in the Phaedrus. However, it's very confusing, and Chaucer, in The Miller's Tale, gives a much more hilarious example immediately following The Knight's Tale in the form of The Miller's Tale, which is a tale of two men also falling for one woman, but the man who wins the woman is not the one who loves her pure and chaste from afar, but the one who actually talks to her, and they engage in some schemes to help her get away from her unloving husband. Clever Nicholas and Allison are agreed on this plan, that Nicholas shall devise a trick to beguile her hapless, jealous husband. And if it so be the game went right, she should sleep in his arms all night, for this was his desires and hers also. Thus, Chaucer makes this love story very, very unpure, very unchaste, and very, very close. A complete mockery of that highfalutin chivalric love of the night before and Plato or Boethius. So, this is the kind of story that we see echoed throughout the ages, mocking chivalric love while also masquerading under the same name. We see it in The Three Musketeers, where in the original book, contrary to what the Disney adaptation would have you believe, D'Artagnan's true love, at first sight of course, Constance, is actually married to his landlord. So to be with her, he plays a trick on the landlord, gets him arrested by the cardinal, shenanigans ensue, and Constance dies. This is also where George R.R. Martin seems to take his perspective on chivalric love, that it never actually exists except in the stories, and if anyone does love like this, they end up very, very dead. Thus, the selfish, cynical twist on love that so many modern authors have adapted as a commentary on chivalry does not seem to be the sort of message that Sanderson wants to give his readers. Rather, I think he takes the higher road and rebrands it as the redeeming love. The first two romance storylines we've seen in the Stormlight archive thus far, Adolin and Shallan, Dalinar and Navani, seem to be taking their cues from, if not Don Quixote the novel itself, then at least definitely the musical Man of La Mancha, where the knight errant, who is insane, sees in error the lowly kitchen maid as a high lady of platonic ideal.
Dear God, it is she. Sweet lady, fair virgin.
This humorous bout of madness still helps the lady see her own self-worth and brings her to a better place in life at the end. Thus, it is distinct from Plato, as he views lovers as having no flaws but mad, while this kind of says they have flaws, but because they love each other, despite them, that is their madness. Dalinar and Navani have plenty of flaws between the two of them, and as we discussed in my analysis of the Duel of the Champions tropes, if it weren't for Dalinar loving Navani pure and chaste from afar, we would have caught them as the evil uncle and scheming queen right away. But because they brush up to this platonic ideal of self-control, they just come off as slightly crazy, and crazy in love that helps them become better versions of themselves. Likewise, Adolin and Shallan are cute and wholesome and bring out the best of each other. He supports her truths, she supports him, expanding his interest beyond other women, but they also have the highest body count of named characters in the Stormlight archive, and accept each other as murderers. I kept thinking about how I was lying to you, to Father, and to everyone. The Honorable Adolin Colin, the consummate duelist, a murderer. And Shallan? I don't think I'm sorry. Shallan shivered, then whispered, "Good for you." Shallan! You're a radiant. You're not supposed to condone something like this. Thus, it is because Adolin is not the pure Prince Charming that we believe him to be, that Shallan can actually get close to him and love him for who he is.
If this is how you behave as a prince, what kind of king will you be?
I was raised to be charming, not sincere.
Through these couples, Sanderson explores the madness of beloving a flawed person and bringing them up to a better version of themselves, and how wonderfully, magically crazy it all is. And while this worked beautifully for these two couples, it seems he's taken a different tack with the Renlain and Cíladin shipping setting sail in Book 5. The new idyllic love. In some ways, Renarin and Relain's relationship is very, very close to that high first ideal love we see discussed in the Phaedrus. First, because they are gay, which was normal in ancient Greece, even if it's not considered so today. And modern readers just aren't used to seeing this relationship. The closest I can find in contemporary literature was Sebastian Flight and Kurt in Brideshead Revisited, where, yes, it is heavily implied on page that they were in a queer relationship where they found truth, love, and happiness with each other. As long as Sebastian had Kurt to look after, he was happy. Sebastian told me he'd practically given up drinking at one time while he and Kurt lived together. Kurt was ill and had a wound that wouldn't heal. Sebastian saw him through that. Then they went to Greece when Kurt got well. Now, Evelyn Waugh here gives both Sebastian and Kurt their own flaws that help them bring each other together in a more redemptive sort of love we discussed above. But Sanderson strikes closer to Plato in that neither Renarin or Relain actually have character flaws that make them make mistakes that move the plot forward. Rather, they have some slight personality traits that make their relationship difficult, with Renarin being on the spectrum. To paraphrase Avril Lavigne, he was a boy, he was also a boy, it was not intuitively obvious. And with Relain being a singer, there's that whole interspecies communication thing to go on top, but neither of these are like character flaws. As they aren't bad choices that the characters made in their past and have to brace themselves up from with the help of their lover. Instead, the flaws these two face are the choices made by people from the past and everyone around them, and it is their love that will fix the situation. Relain said to the Rhythm of Anxiety, "Are you sure, Renarin? I don't think that the world is going to take kindly to us being together. I don't want you to get hurt." "Will you be the one to hurt me?" "No," Relain said to Confidence. "Never." "Then I will risk it," he said. "Come on, I think I'm close to understanding what Mishram is trying to say to us." So let me know down in the comments section, is Renarin and Relain's relationship still woke? Or is it, for me at least, just too close to the platonic ideal? Kaladin and Syl's relationship also shares the title of being too idyllic, but in a different way. Now, unlike Renarin and Relain, they both have made choices that have impacted the plot for the worse, especially Kaladin, who would regularly in the early books turn away from Syl and then have to freely choose to make a deeper bond with her. Then he would swear an ideal, get a magic power upgrade, and fix most of the problems. Meanwhile, Syl got a lot more character development in books 3, 4, and 5, showing that she is not just a manic pixie dream girl, but has her own wants and desires, and that her problem of trying to be a people pleaser gets her into trouble. And yet, despite knowing that she had flaws, I had always focused on the fact that Syl is basically a type of fairy goddess, and that she and Kaladin couldn't have a physical relationship. Therefore, they shouldn't have a physical relationship, and they should never have a conversation that sounds like... Still wondering how much detail I have, aren't you? She said, leaning up against him. No, he said forcefully. You're going to find a way to embarrass me. So now. She rolled her eyes. We are as we were imagined, Kaladin, she said. Basically human, but with certain enviable improvements. You can assume that if a human has it, I do too. Unless it's icky.
Shut up!
I beg your pardon?
Those two getting physical raised so many Little Mermaid-esque problems that seemed at odds with the self-realization fantasy Sanderson had been selling us for the past 4 books. So it was a relief for me, really, when Kaladin chose to become a herald because it is what he wanted to do and not because he thought it was what Syl wanted him to do. This free choice came with a certain positive upgrade in him getting a body of investiture very similar to Syl's. We use bodies of power when we return, child, Ishar said. No one dies to create us. Honor found such an idea as the fused abhorrent, once. Kaladin nodded, steeling himself as his soul began to vibrate. A light enveloped him, and as it did, Syl found his hand, and he could feel her grip it. That makes Syladin a lot easier to go down. It seems like Sanderson is, again, playing with that old myth of Eros and Psyche, where a god lowered themselves to love a mortal, and that love raised the mortal up to a divine level. Thus, Sanderson is returning us to those ancient ideals of Greece through a very novel and innovative method. One could argue that Kaladin and Syl, by not having typical physical bodies, won't have a physical relationship like the one that Plato decries as being second best. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Does Renarin and Relane's relationship work for you? What about Syladin? Or are they too close to those unrealistic platonic ideals for modern romance tropes to really work for them? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Please like, share, and subscribe if you want to see more. Otherwise, thanks for watching. Bye!